Senator Comerford has offered an amendment which the clerk will read.
Amendment number 1 by Ms. Comerford, Embodied Carbon Coordinating Council and Plan.
Senator Comerford.
Thank you, Mr. President, and through you to our colleagues. Mr. President, without objection, I'll speak to Amendment number 1 and Amendment number 2, which comes right after. So I join my colleagues, Mr. President, in being grateful that today the Senate is acting with urgency demanded by a global climate emergency. I add my thanks, as many have, to the Senator from Lexington, to the Senator from Newton, to the Senate President, to our Ways and Means Chair for their steadfast commitment to combating climate change with the required scale, thoroughness, and tenacity that is required. We must accelerate the deployment of clean energy in order to comply with the state's emissions reduction limits and to meet the existing threat of global warming. And yet, we must be thoughtful about how we site that infrastructure that will power us forward for the next 100 years or more. Our 2050 net zero roadmap law requires that we track and grow emissions reductions from carbon sequestration. And the minority leader and I were discussing this earlier because we were very heartened with the partnership and leadership of the Senator from Lexington that we made that advance in the Senate, that we defined carbon sequestration and that we're counting it now as part of our work. We need solar, we need battery storage, and we need natural and working lands. And in my district, the natural and working lands conversation is the most foreground of all of them. This bill reflects a commitment to achieve a delicate balance in reforming our siting and permitting processes. Move too slowly, and we will keep relying on dirty fuels, not comply with our emission reduction agreements and requirements, and we will have abdicated our responsibility in the fight against climate change. Move too quickly, and without sufficient nuance, and we will be left with infrastructure that is not sited thoughtfully, overburdening already stressed municipalities where our invaluable natural and working lands once were. That is the balance I believe this bill is trying to achieve. This Senate has responded to priority issues in my district within previous climate bills. Today, the Senate is responding again. This bill reforms our current process for clean energy siting and permitting, two red-hot topics in my region that municipalities are grappling with mightily. What's clear, though, friends, is that the current process has not been working, as municipalities have had their solar bylaws struck down, and developers have pursued exemptions to municipal bylaws at the Energy Facility Siting Board and the Department of Public Utilities without municipalities or community groups having the ability or means or funds to intervene in those proceedings. That is the pain currently experienced in my district. The bill we are debating today already includes many of the things I have been advocating for, with the deepest thanks possible to the Senator from Lexington for listening to constituents from Western Massachusetts. I'll just name a few, although there are more. It grants municipalities intervenor status by right. It ensures that towns of fewer than 7,500 residents automatically receive funds to become an intervenor at the DPU or EFSB proceedings. It requires a methodology to evaluate whether a site is well suited for clean energy infrastructure and to consider carbon storage and sequestration, biodiversity, and social and environmental benefits and burdens in that methodology. It requires developers to avoid, minimize, and mitigate, in that order, citing impacts and environmental and land use concerns. And finally, in my list, again, there's more than this, it creates a new office at the Division of Public Participation responsible for assisting individuals, local governments, and community organizations with navigating the EFSB and DPU, and opportunities to provide comment and facilitating dialogue among all stakeholders involved in permitting. And I thank the administration, and particularly Undersecretary Michael Judge, for being such an important partner in the above as well. We have over 100 amendments in the debate today, so I will stop here with, again, thanks to my colleagues for their thoughtful work on this bill. and to the residents of my district, who are some of the most tenacious advocates on this issue, I imagine potentially statewide. And with that, Mr. President, I will speak to amendment number 1, followed by amendment number 2. So amendment number 1 is embodied carbon in buildings. Embodied carbon is, of course, as we've talked about in these opening remarks, the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the manufacturing, transportation, installation, maintenance, and disposal of building materials. All the carbon that's made when we make building materials. It also acknowledges the carbon that can be captured and stored in building materials. This amendment creates an embodied carbon intergovernmental coordinating council within DCAM and designates seats on that council. The council is required to create an embodied carbon reduction plan. The plan would set limits on the embodied carbon materials in the state's construction projects by 2026, a reasonable timeline. The plan would review current laws and regulations on embodied carbon and make recommendations for future laws and policies to promote the use of low embodied carbon materials. And remember, friends, as the debate kicked off, we were talking about carbon sequestration and embodied carbon and the role of that in our state's climate. The plan would consider integrating the reduction of embodied carbon into building codes, including the Stretch Energy Code. And you will remember, friends, that this Senate led the Net Zero Building Code. And we did that with great pride, I believe. And this is another addition, potentially, to that Stretch Energy Code, however, with a longer runway, because this is a complex issue. The amendment also requires EOHLC, in coordination with EEA, to promulgate rules or regulations to implement a cradle-to-grave life cycle assessment of state-funded housing projects. This amendment is supported by Climate Chief Melissa Hoffer. I have deep gratitude for Chief Hoffer, and also AIA, who have been critical allies in this work. And incorporates concepts filed in legislation by my team and I, and of course from the Senator from Newton, and I have my thanks to the Senator from Newton for her interest and leadership on this issue as well. Mr. President, amendment number 2 incentivizes solar canopies on built and disturbed land. And I will say here that one of the things I have spoken with colleagues in Senate leadership about is that my colleagues want the green revolution like I do, and my constituents want the green revolution like other constituents do. We just want to make sure that every single effort is being made to cite solar first on the built environment and on disturbed land. That is critical before taking any other non-disturbed, open or working land. So we should be doing everything possible to make this a reality, like Washington State or France, friends, which passed laws incentivizing solar over parking lots, for example. This amendment is similar to a bill I filed, S2089, an act to promote solar canopies over large parking lots. It directs DOER to convene a stakeholder working group to study and report on regulations or laws needed to encourage the construction and operation of solar canopies. Let's have solar canopies everywhere they are possible on built or disturbed lands. This is the charge of this working group. This is what they will return to us so that we can actualize it as soon as possible. And to report the recommendations to the committees on TUE and global warming and climate change. Thank you, Mr. President. I hope amendments number 1 and 2 are adopted.